Hello, everyone, and welcome to my talk. I'm here to tell you about the midlife crisis, and it's not the one where you buy a bike or a yacht, but rather what happens once you stop being a junior. So first, I wanted to ask you, who's here not a junior anymore? Can you please raise your hands? Great, congratulations. It's not easy to enter the design industry nowadays, and you did it. You passed the big hurdle. I wish I could tell you the worst is behind you, but the real challenge only begins now. At least that was my experience back in the day. Because the side wheels are off, you're expected to be at least partly independent, and especially without proper support, what happens during the mid-journey can be infuriating and heartbreaking. And that's why I wanted to tell you about some of the possible hurdles ahead and how I tackled them. And I'll talk about how to design and deliver value despite severe limitations, like lack of research, how to deal with your daily work situations, how to approach your professional development, how to deal with difficulties and disillusionment, and of course, how to quit. And before we move on, a very important disclaimer. This is not a universal works for everyone solution. What worked for me might not work for you because, you know, it depends. And this is a joke at this point, and everyone says UX designers just answer, it depends, but the reality is it's often the start of an answer and the right start of an answer, but can never be the end of it. Because it's your job as designers to know what it depends on and how to work with it. And speaking of the designer's jobs, you often see on the internet famous people stating that you're not a real designer if you don't do research, don't test your solutions, don't create visual interfaces, don't know typography, and so on and so forth. And I disagree. I like Mike Montero's definition of design, which is solving problems within a set of constraints. And there are multiple constraints you're going to face and you're facing in your job. And even if you know exactly how to overcome them, it's not always possible for various reasons, but primarily human factors. And accepting this is a major milestone in your career. It's where the path towards maturity begins. So who's been in this situation? I know I've been multiple times. And it's not your fault. You did your best. You know why research is important. You know what value it provides. And you tell everyone how crucial it is to do research. But your client or your boss just simply won't have it because there's not enough time. There's not enough money. And even still, you're expected to deliver. And as Jared Spool once wrote, there's a technical name for absence of user research. It's guessing. And I wholly agree, but I don't believe we are entirely powerless if we don't have access to research, and that our guesses cannot be educated, because lack of research is a constraint. So what to do? Improvise, adapt, overcome. There are multiple things you can do without proper user research, and one of them is desk research. And it's important not only to look at the direct and indirect competition, but also check stuff like product reviews, social media, look at other industries, because you never know when a practice from the world of carpentry will become useful for a food service app, and it will at some point. Look for metaphors and mental models, especially in real life, that you can translate into your digital product to help users understand it better. And most importantly, hoard, save everything. You never know when it will be useful. Another thing you can do is follow the best practices. And there are universal elements like navigation, forms, and stuff like that that had been tested and researched in and out by multiple people. So use that research, use that knowledge, and make stuff better based on it. Look at existing design systems like human interface guidelines or material design and check how they do it. Prevent errors. Instead of notifying users when they made an error, try create solutions that don't allow an error to happen. For example, if you're preparing a date picker for a future event, make sure that past dates are disabled in the picker. And most importantly, don't copy blindly, because what works for Amazon might not necessarily work for your product. Or they could just made a blunder and you'd be following blindly. Another thing you can do is do accessibility. It's not only the right thing to do, not only required by law soon, but also you can do a lot without research. You can follow the best practices, you can make sure it follows the guidelines, and if you make stuff more accessible, at the same time, it will become more usable, so it's a win-win. It's a team effort between you, UI designers, developers, and so on, but someone needs to start and pilot the conversation. And it's going to be required by law very soon, so better learn and implement it now than do it later. Another thing you don't need research for is being ethical. You can prevent many anti-customer patterns, like dark patterns or system requirements. So if someone tells you, our system requires this data, so users need to input it, work around it. It's not the users for the system, it's the other way around. And don't focus on conversion for conversion's sake. It's obviously important, but only if it's meaningful and the leads are worthwhile. Remember about inclusivity. Ensure everyone feels welcome in your product. So use the right pronouns, use the right options in the gender picker if you really need to have one, and use the correct visuals and imaginary. And pick your battles, because you won't be able to win everything. So focus on what you feel is the most important. And if all else fails, there's also a technique that's a personal favorite of mine. It's brute force. So basically what you do is you take your designs, break them, fix them, break them again, fix them, and break them again, until you yourself are not able to find a fault. It's not foolproof, it's not perfect, but it makes the product better because you know how it works, why it works like that. It's also very useful when discussing designs with the customers, because they will ask, why does it look like that? And you know, because you broke it multiple times before. And if you do all that, it's guaranteed that it will be better than it would be without your input. And as Kuba Danecki said a few years back on this stage, almost the worst is still better than the worst, and that's a win. So take that win and enjoy it. After all, we just need an MVP to work, right? We'll fix it later. And speaking of MVPs, you all know how the design process looks like. So it's meetings, more meetings, design theater, getting UI feedback to wireframes, and even more meetings. Sounds familiar, right? And jokes aside, a lot of your daily work revolves around communication. And I believe this is a key skill for any designer and needs to be honed and trained, because there are a lot of difficult conversations to be had. With sales that will shoot down your ideas, tell you estimated too much, and what can you do in a week? And you need to be able to answer that and not say, I can do anything in a week. No. You need to know what can you do in a week, communicate clearly that you could do so much more if you had more time. But we can do this in a week. You'll have difficult conversations with the clients who will know better, who know their customers. And this is Mark. He knows everything about customers, so talk to them. We don't need research. And you're going to have difficult conversations with your developers, who actually developers can be your greatest allies in IT if you work for it. So get to know them, learn to get along, and it will pay off. By the way, if a developer tells you something cannot be done, they're most likely simplifying, because it can be done, but requires a lot of time, a lot of money, a different stack, and so on and so forth. So talk to your developer, learn what's limiting them, and try to work around to preserve your design, but also make it doable in a finite amount of time. And make sure to remember that even if you have the best arguments in the world, even if you're right, it doesn't mean people will listen to you. So instead, listen to them. And ask why a lot. Discover the real reasons and needs, the real motivations, and work out a way to work around them and answer them. Yes, you will have to compromise. And sometimes you will need to agree to things that will make your UX heart curl, wither, and die. But it still beats the alternative. To that end, always have doubts. Admit openly you don't know something, but that you are willing to learn it and you know how. You need to have a certain amount of confidence to say this is not right for the users, but you need to balance it with humility and openness to other ideas, because contrary to what some famous people say, not everyone is a designer, but that doesn't mean they can't have good ideas. And it's your job to find and nurture the good ideas and shoot down the bad ones. Speaking of generating ideas based on assumptions, that's the very definition of design theater. And dissing it and dissing, in particular, design thinking is a topic for a whole other talk, and I won't do it right now. But don't get pulled into empathizing with users no one ever talked to, creating personas based on Google searches, workshops that make the clients happy, etc. Because workshops are not for the clients to be happy with them. Workshops are for you to learn what you need to do your job. So focus on that. Because what you really need is not design thinking, but critical thinking and design doing, not the theatrics. Eventually, you'll need to show off your work. And wireframes are tricky, because a lot of people don't know how to work with them. And they will comment on UI issues to the wireframes. That's why you will need to have a short speech handy that you will give at the beginning of the project to explain how to work with wireframes, what kind of feedback is useful, what kind of feedback is not useful. And you cannot ever send the wireframes to the client without presenting it and telling, explaining your ideas. Because the client will form their own assumptions, often contrary to your intentions, and things will get messy. So if you cannot schedule a demo, record a short video explainer, for example, using Loom, and send it along the wireframes. Never let the wireframes speak for themselves. And having said all that, how to deal with that and develop yourself? The truth is, I found it the most difficult to develop as a mid, especially as a sole UX designer in a company. A lot of it was trial and error. And I find it a very good way of learning. However, if you find a more senior person to help you out, don't let them fix your mistakes. You do it yourself based on their feedback. And another thing is, most of our work relies on so-called soft skills, which are not soft and are very hard to master. And I prefer the term coined by Bart Yukowski, which is al dente skills. So learn them and hone them, because this is the bread and butter of designer work. Another thing is accessibility and inclusivity. Not just because it's the right thing to do, not just because it's required by law, but because the skills are getting in more and more demand. And if you have them, you will have much better chances out in the wild. And As a designer, you'll also need to familiarize yourself with business and strategy, because it's not just about wireframes. So these are the skills I'd recommend to concentrate on. Oh, and design tools. Speaking of tools, here's my stack. Talking to people, research and benchmarking, pen and paper, Miro, and the flavor of the month, design software. Because, it's not about Figma. Don't get attached to software because they come and go. A few years back it was Axure, then it was Sketch, now it's Figma, tomorrow who knows. And wireframes are a very short-lived artifact in the life cycle of the product. So very often it's simply a waste of time and effort to make sure they are pixel perfect and use auto layout and whatever. And virtually the only people who will appreciate your Figma finesse are other designers, and these are not the people you need to impress. As Buzz Wallet says, you can be the Figma master, but if you don't use it to produce meaningful designs, it makes no sense. And critical strategic thinking will take you much further than Figma mastery. So put your effort where the most value is. Speaking of value, I would like to recommend you some books to read. And they're not about tools, but they will help you expand your horizons and think differently about design. And they are masterfully written as well. So, Mike Monteiro's Design is a Job, the Necessary Second Edition. Also Mike Monteiro's Ruined by Design. Debbie Lewitt's Customers Know You Suck. And Marcin Wicha's Jak przestałem kochać design. I believe they have a potential to make you a better designer and possibly a better person as well. Especially Mike writes a lot about designers' ethics and responsibility. And the question of designer ethics and responsibility is, in my mind, a very important one. You will certainly encounter during your career a lot of situations where your work has real impact on other lives. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean we shouldn't design better interfaces and better stuff. But we need to have in mind that our actions have consequences. And UX design is being sold as a good thing to do, that bring people value, make their lives simpler, and so on. But the sad reality is rarely those ideas hold up at work. We are hired to make money. And ultimately, it's up to us. Where do we draw the line? Speaking of drawing, be vigilant for times when you're relegated to being a wireframe monkey or a pixel pusher. So when you aren't allowed to affect the product in any meaningful way and your voice is neither heard nor recognized. And this is okay-ish for juniors because they will learn the ropes, learn the process, get familiar with the tools, but you're not juniors anymore. So if your ideas are overruled and expertise is disregarded, it's very easy to lose faith in yourself. And this is a very common designer affliction, the imposter syndrome. It happens to a lot of us, and people cope with it differently. I like to remind myself of the quote by Mike Montero, who basically says, if you finished a very long recruitment process, did multiple interviews, beat multiple candidates, there are only two, and got the job, there are only two options. You're either a master of deception or actually good at your job. And I find comfort in this. Speaking of comfort, are you familiar with the Kaplan's drama triangle? Basically, it describes three roles in a relationship, and people switch between those roles in a vicious circle: the persecutor, the rescuer, and the victim. And this is something I found out to be present in the IT industry in multiple forms. And IT drama triangle, if you will. And this is just one of the many possible toxic situations you can find yourself in. And it's crucial to know your limits. Yes, it's your job to side with the users, but it's not your job to do overtime or endure a toxic environment for their sake, because it's not your fault. Escalate and try to improve your working conditions if you feel it's worth it. but know when to throw in the towel. Quitting is fine, especially if it serves your well-being. And when hunting for a new job, the most important thing is to not land in a similar or worse situation. So set your requirements and stick to them, but it doesn't have to be a perfect fit on both sides. So if you don't fulfill all the requirements from the job ad, don't be afraid to apply. Use your UX design skills to build your CV and portfolio, and not the UI skills, but UX skills. Think about who's gonna read it, how to present yourself, how to tell about your unique value, because recruitment is a sales process in its own way. So make sure that it shows not only that you know how the design process looks like, but what unique value do you bring for the future employer. And I found it pays out, to be honest. If you lack a skill, be open about it and declare if you're willing to learn it or not. And if you have unpopular opinions, don't be afraid to voice them, because in the end, being honest will get you more points or save you from a miserable job. Finally, I urge you to explore. The UX field is extremely varied, with many shapes and flavors, and just try out as much as you can, because your mid-journey is the perfect time to do that. There are various companies, big ones, small ones, startups, agencies, products, some non-toxic ones even. There are various industries: IoT, health tech, med tech, gaming, fintech, various activities like research, workshop facilitation, UX writing, audits, sales. Find a unique combination that works for you and answer the question, what do you enjoy doing? And we're almost done, and the principles of presentation say I need to end with a clear CTA for you. So here goes. Doing stuff that excites you is the best way not to quit. Thank you very much.